Sure. Well, one thing I'd love to do is kind of define what a privacy breach is. So we talk about security breaches, right? Security breaches is some problem in the security. So I always use the castle analogy. It's like, someone has gone through and into the castle. It's pretty easy. But from a privacy perspective, we think of privacy as if someone's stolen my data, but it's also someone has altered my data, or someone has made my data inaccessible. And so when we talk about things like, as Sick just said, like if you're talking about things that are proprietary information, in the previous panel, they were talking about, temperature control and feeding amounts. If somebody actually goes in and changes that data, that's obviously going to profoundly affect how your operation can happen. And then in addition to that, the inaccessibility can bring your company down. So when we talk about ransomware, that's often depends on the circumstances, but ransomware is often someone nefarious saying, hey, you can't access your data until you pay a fine. And if you can't access your data, you're not just losing the business that would have come in or whatever would have happened that day. You're certainly losing the operations from that day. And what does that mean in your farm or in your company?
Yeah, very true. Ritesh, you having some thought here?
Yeah, so I remember I was taking food law, and we had a professor come in from the University of Ottawa who said, did you know that there's over 1,000 registered farms in the Ottawa region alone? And that kind of blew me away. And a lot of them were independent. They were small businesses, family run and operated. So that is the ecosystem. You got a lot of big players, but you have many more small players that fit into the supply chain. So to me, the biggest risk, and I borrow this line off a friend, the most dangerous thing you're going to do today is open email. And just think about that. That might be the most dangerous thing you're possibly going to do today. So when you have small businesses, when you have the complexity of cyber, I think a lot of us would agree that at some point there's going to be some sort of, as Kat mentioned, breach, whether it be somebody accessing your data, altering your data, or as Sick mentioned, just some nefarious reason to steal trade secrets. To me, the biggest risk is, okay, the breach has happened. What do I do next? How long am I going to be down for? What is my business continuity? Where do I start if I've been breached? And that to me is, yes, there's the technical risks, but there's also this other element of it is what's next. Because I always take into account, I think of the independent business owner, and these are individuals who are probably going to be extremely frustrated, don't know how much this is going to cost, don't know what the next steps are. And as a result, they might do certain things that actually makes the situation worse, not better.
Right. Yes, very true.
Can I follow that up with a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in the case of AGCO, I'm sure AGCO obviously Fent, Massey Ferguson, Challenger, they got ransomware, and I'm sure most of the audience understands they got ransomware last year, and it was a pretty big event. The main takeaways from the event wasn't necessarily that they were out of action for a certain amount of time, but I think some of the biggest things that were taken away from that event was they stole all of the software, source code, contracts, customer lists, just anything you can imagine that you've sent to the business before, invoices, etc., just all that sort of stuff was taken away from them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be given, like you can't necessarily give it back, or like say, for example, they weren't necessarily down for a long time, they can fix all the ransomware quick snap, but just knowing that someone else has all of that data is quite concerning, because they can do all sorts of nefarious things, but also things down the track, like even subtle things like steal customers and like build competitive products. There's real like long-term risks that might not seem obvious, but they sound obvious when you say them. But I definitely know of certain activities that I've seen along the way of that actually happening, with people just stealing each other's trade secrets for all sorts of different purposes, sabotage, espionage, and the opposite, like just want to find out what the competitor's doing.
Yeah. So it seems, based on our discussion so far, is like we are looking at three top threats here. First is the confidentiality of the information. There are like many confidential information that are produced in this sector and need to be protected, both from competitors as well as attackers, hackers, of course. Privacy, as it has been several times mentioned here, that privacy of this information is quite important, and how they can be linked to different people and groups of people could cause damage. And of course, the risk of not knowing what to do when you have been compromised, because the compromises are happening, but we should have a plan in place to see what are the next steps for instant response, for business continuity, who to call, who to ask for the help, right? Looking at all these risks, how do you think the businesses are currently protecting themselves, right? And specifically, when we look into the cybersecurity, there are three elements: people, process, and technology. When it comes to protection, specifically on these three domains, the three different parts, how do you see the businesses are starting to protect themselves and reduce the risks that were mentioned? Maybe starting with Kat today. I mean, for this question.
Sure. So how are they, or how should they be, I think is kind of a bit of a problem. So before we had so much tech, before we had so much reliance on tech, we were already busy, right? People were already at capacity. And then we've all introduced all this stuff. And now we're all sitting here saying, oh, by the way, on top of your regular jobs, you also need to do these 25 other things. And everyone's like, I don't have time to do that. So from a people perspective, definitely education is what matters here. Every single individual that works with you or for you is responsible for the access to the data, to the systems. And so everyone needs to understand that they have a role to play. And I'm sure we'll get into that more as we go through the various different topics. So that's people. From a technology perspective, there are a lot of tools which we will be discussing that can help you to mitigate the threats, that can help you to make sure people can't access your data or notifies you when that happens. But which tools do you pick? How much money are you willing to spend? Do you have a budget for cybersecurity for these tools? And certainly from a process perspective, as Ritesh had already hinted at, what do we do all the time, from little kids in schools all the way up to companies, is fire drills. We do fire drills all the time, because in the event of a fire, you do not want people not to know how to get out. So we need the processes and policies in place in advance, not once we've had a problem, so that when you do have an issue, you know exactly what steps you're going to take. You know that plan. You already have a policy around something, so that when you do receive data, you're not like, I don't know what we do with this. No, you have the policy. Everyone is socialized. Everyone in your company kind of knows what that is, or at the farm knows what that is. And everyone's on the board with what they're supposed to be doing.
Interesting. Yes. Three views. What do you think, Ritesh?
So I'm really glad that you said people, process, and technology right off the bat. You kind of stole what I was going to say, but the reason I mentioned that is what I find is the opposite, right? It seems to be the solution for a lot of organizations, which is wrong, which is technology, process, then people. Is let's just throw a piece of tech in there. Let's get some piece of software. Let's hire this firm and we're going to solve all of our problems. And as Kat alluded to, that's definitely not the solution. The solution for me is, and she talked about fire alarms or fire drills. I couldn't agree more with that. The analogy I like to use, and just building on Kat's analogy, is when the fire alarm goes off, it doesn't matter whether it's today or 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. We know exactly what we're going to do, and we invest in it. Think about it. We got smoke detectors that will alert us if there's a potential problem. We got fire alarms that will start ringing to get us out of the particular location. We got a phone number to call, 911. A fire truck shows up. They know what to do. We have insurance in place. We have continuity. We can go to a hotel. Like, we've thought about these things in the physical world. We haven't really thought about these things in the cyber world. So when those cyber alarms go off, what are we going to do? Who are we going to call? What processes are in place? What's our business continuity plan? And I think the answer to your question is, or to all the people watching this, is if you don't know what to do when those alarms go off at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, even let's just assume you don't even have an IT department, which a lot of businesses don't. They don't have IT departments and cybersecurity professionals that they can call. What is going to be your plan? So again, the answer for me is this is cultural. It needs to be embedded. If we're going to put people first, it needs to be people, process, then technology, not the opposite, being technology, process, then people.
Yeah, backing that up, I think I forgot one risk that I'll mention as well, which is machine uptime, because obviously food, and without food, people don't eat. Without meals, there's, we have small world wars everywhere. And another thing I was going to touch on was you both discussed a point about plans and actions and things. I think ag is very unique because comparing it to other industries that have hacked, cars, mining, they're all big trucks, tractors, big machines, but they all have very different formulas in the business. In that, like, for example, mining, the wheels are $250,000. There's no people in them. There's, what do you do if an autonomous mining truck, which is like, 250 tons? What do you do when that runs out of, when someone hacks into that? What are they going to drive? You have to wait till it runs out of fuel. And I think the other example that I had, I spoke to the mining ISAC recently, actually, and I spoke to the mining ISAC and the auto ISAC, comparing ag, auto with mining, and then you've got construction, forestry, etc. But everything's unique, and I think that's what's missing in ag is that we've got a lot of things going on at the moment, like Precision Ag Task Force is coming out of YouTube, out of the FCC. It's a little bit different, but I think one of the things that's missing in all this to actually identify risk is actually an ag ISAC. And I think that I've been discussing with some folks, ag ISAC, and that, like, having vendors in a, if you're not familiar with the ISAC, I think it's independent, something exchange, whatever. It's part of ISO 27000. How many zeros is it? 001 2022, the new revision. It actually lists a new thing in there, and you can just Google the ISO updates for the year for cyber. And one of them is join a threat exchange platform. And whether that's, you join some massive commercial one, or the financial services ISAC, which has like 85,000 members or something ridiculous. I think ag doesn't actually have one. So mining has its own ISAC where they all in-house do things internally, but ag doesn't. And I've discussed it with a few folks, including, I think the mining ISAC is in Canada, actually. It's in Canada. Rob, his name's Rob. I don't know his last name, but I think that's what's missing. And because we're asking questions that, in fact, when I was reading over these questions, I didn't actually know the answer to something, because I'm thinking to myself, how do you educate people? How do people, where do they go? There's nowhere to actually go except for like things like this, right? So having an ag ISAC, somewhere in exchange where lots of different entities can exchange ideas, I think would be beneficial and something to think about.
Yeah, music to my ear. I mean, the past like 2-3 years, I was trying to push for creating an ISAC, or even if they don't understand in the ISAC, an independent group in the ag sector for cybersecurity. I know there are some good initiatives happening in Canada, but yeah, that's exactly one of the gaps that we can probably address many issues in the field in terms of sharing threats, in terms of improving the understanding, security awareness, as well as understanding the liabilities, right, in the field, and best practices, right? That is always there. But then Ritesh mentioned something interesting about the priority of people, process, and technology, right? And these examples that Code was providing was interesting as well, in the sense that comparing different industries, we see that they are treating it in different manners. So for example, if you're in an industry there is a very high turnaround on the human resources, then probably the role of people would be less than the role of process that you have in place to make sure that the things are getting secure as people are changing. And there are even some organizations that they can fully rely on tech because they are thinking that the tech would never fail them, right? So that could be even priority sometime. But specifically in the ag sector, what do you think? What's your priority? If you want to prioritize in terms of people, process, and technology, which do you think has the highest priority? And then which one will be second and third? I think Ritesh was mentioning is people, right?
So it's, for me, it's definitely people. That's going to be front, right up there, no matter which sector, whether it be the ag sector, whether it be the tech sector, whether it be the legal sector. People, for me, is always going to be number one, and I will argue that to death. And I just want to mention two things. I want to build on something that my friend Six said. So the first one is, we talk about culture and people, and the way I think about this from the ag sector is 20 years ago, you get to a construction site or a farm or any type of production that's going on in a manufacturing facility. And you're like, do I really have to wear my PPE? Do I really need steel toe boots? Do I really need that hard hat? Do I really need to wear the particular type of ears? Because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise in that particular area. Today, you wouldn't think twice before going into a production facility without wearing the proper PPE. And I think cyber is today where health and safety was 20 years ago, where now health and safety has been ingrained in the culture of an organization. And I think cyber is starting to get that, especially if we hear more about these breaches. Unfortunately, it's still very reactive. A lot of companies don't invest in this stuff until they've been breached. So how do you make it proactive? But it's that cultural component. So, my first point is like health and safety. Cybersecurity is where health and safety was 20 years ago. But then Sick mentioned something, and I think I really need to talk about this very quickly. And you said $250,000 equipment in the mining sector or tech sector. Just a tire. Okay,
yeah,
just a tire. Well, that's a pretty expensive piece of equipment. And I remember growing up, and as I said, I grew up in a food production facility. Literally, my crib was there. Just to put into perspective, we didn't have babysitters. We were forced into working at my parents' place, but that's a whole other story. And clearly, it's this. I know this is not a therapy session. So, but we had a guy. I think we all had a person. His name was Ed. And when something went wrong, we call Ed, and we said, Ed, can you fix this machine for us? And the reason for that is if you call the manufacturer, you're going to pay an arm and a leg. And there's this big push right now for the right to repair, the right to and I think what we're seeing now with these machines, $250,000 tire, for example, is that a lot of companies, and there's even legislation coming out around the world saying, actually, you need to allow people to repair their devices. The warranty should still stay intact. There's some rules around it. But the right to repair is now causing issues as well. Because let's take a tractor, for example. A tractor used to be a tractor with computer components. Now it's a computer with tractor components. So that is causing potential risks and issues as well. So I will stop talking to give my fellow panelists a chance to add in. But those were the two things that I really wanted to get out on: the comparison between health and safety and cyber, and this discussion around right to repair. It's a good thing, but there are some caveats to it.
Interesting. So you believe on the people then? Go.
Yeah, to come back on the people, as Ritesh said as well. I mean, the stats keep changing, but we're at somewhere 90+% of all cyber issues are human error. And I mean, you can install the best lock in the world on a door, but if someone leaves it propped open, it's useless. So, I mean, really easy cyber hygiene best practices, setting good passwords. The whole Equifax thing still comes down to an admin, right? They had admin as the username, admin as the password, because it was too difficult to have everyone memorize the same difficult password. So, and it was one account. Things like that, things like creating good cyber hygiene so that individuals know not to leave computer desktops unlocked, not to let individuals into buildings where they might have access to your systems. All that kind of stuff is humans. You can, again, all the tools in the world, but they won't do you any good if the people aren't trained to use them properly.
My name is Rosita Dara. I'm a faculty at the School of Computer Science, University of Guelph. My research is on governance of technology and data, and I apply it to digital ag, basically. So just wanted to say hi and briefly on the topic. I'm not sure what the previous question, the actual question was, but I wanted to just say I completely agree. I have been working in several actual farms on security issues. I cannot put more emphasis as much as my colleagues did around people and human aspect of cybersecurity in agriculture, at least specifically, and farms. So there are so many basic things that still needs to be done, from kind of cybersecurity hygienes, as Kat indicated. Passwords are all the same on all the computers. Doors are always open, to the control room. Many people come and go, which is an issue. Knowledge of phishing and those basic kind of attacks that could be addressed or at least reported properly. That's not being done. So, and I think, building tools that will communicate properly. I mean, after training, proper training. In terms of what security issues may be, or how they set up the security features, that's also missing. So I don't think we are developing technologies in agriculture that are human-centric. It's mostly built in labs that they feel it's going to be useful, but human-centric aspect of it is is missing. I mean, aside from training, aside from cyber security hygienes and all of those. So from my perspective, I think human aspect of cybersecurity, whether it's the technology communicating properly, whether it's the technology is easy to set up, or whether it's for people following certain the updating, backing up, which is for ransomware, for agriculture, it could be a significant solution, because we have conducted many interviews with farmers. I think they don't consider their data overly sensitive when it's taken, and if they are threatened that it will be published, or so that's not an issue for them. But it's they want to get access to their data, or they want to operate. So if they have proper backup, then and if the knowledge that it has to be properly backed up, some of the cybersecurity issues will be mitigated. So human aspect, training would be definitely important, and also making the technology more user-friendly in terms of how to, or giving options that they can set things up much quicker in terms of security features, because they don't have the option to extensively think about it.
Thank you. Thanks for
Can I just add something to that?
Sure, yeah. Zach, just go support me that technology is more important. Go ahead, because I want to put comments on that.
Support is technology is more important. Yeah, I mean, I come from the other end. I'm coming from, like I hacked, I've hacked John Deere in the past, breached the mainframe, etc. It's well known. Well, to John Deere, we're amicable about it, but like I come from the other end. It's like all of the end users are these farmers, but I'm actually I'm providing evidence or thought into attacking the top of the chain, and then it actually negates anything downhill. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're able to hack at the top, then everything else is destroyed anyway. So my focus is not as my personal focus is more on the actual responsibility of like the vendor, the OEMs, the tier ones, etc. Those, and even the operating systems themselves, like that's where I focus. And I think I don't know, it's just a different level of just a thought process that I'd like to, I think the end user stuff, the end EDR, endpoint detection, I think it's definitely helpful. I think the worst thing that could happen is someone doing major platform level stuff like they did in AgCo, like the Sam Curry and a few other guys demonstrated last July. I think they were able to get the single sign-on for John Deere. We were able to get single sign-on for, as in breach the whole thing, and get into everyone's accounts and then control everyone theoretically, but they didn't do it because obviously it's out of scope. But you would actually be able to control the tractors and that are connected to the platform. But yeah, actually,
your points are interesting. But I mean, from 2 points of view, first of all, looking from the hacker's point of view or hacker mindset, most of the hackers are going for like the assets that once compromised, they are going to give them the most benefits, right? So sometimes, most of the time, the end users are our last option, unless that we can't really hack the technology, we can't really hack the other places, then we come down to the end users for their access, right? But on top of that, there is another justification that comes from tech community, that if the tech was developed with security in mind, security by design, most of these end user issues would never happen. For example, password is never the technology that is built for security, right? I mean, you just allow them to just fingerprinting and then there is no password, right? So you go to the passwordless environment and all of these issues that we are talking about vanish, right? So you could always justify that most of these problems are coming from the way that the technology has been built, that was not having the security by design. But yeah, we will need to go quite a long way to get to that stage that all our technologies are having the security and privacy during the design time implemented, and that would reduce significantly the attack surface. So as we are on the topic of the educating the workforce, because that seems to be one of the best options that gives the best return on investment at the moment, how do you think we should approach it? We should approach the education. I think let's start with Rosita, because she wasn't on the previous question. So Rosita, do you want to start with that? How do you think we are educating the staffs about these threats and the sector, and what's your suggestions there?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Ali. Absolutely, the education is the key. So it can be done at many different levels. It could be part of the education can come from the technology provider and the ones that are developing the tools, providing the network. Also it could be, so I think one of the effective ways, if farms and farmer organizations, or if the technology providers, if they can provide environment by kind of mock scenarios, actual kind of building the scenarios that trainees could relate to it, for example, for phishing, and downloading kind of a document that could include malware, and kind of making them introduce with the hygiene's best practices with examples. And if that training could be provided to the farmers or farm workers or anybody who is involved. So I have focused on I keep focusing on agriculture, because I think that could be the most vulnerable kind of stakeholders within the entire supply chain, that probably they don't have the time or they haven't paid that much of attention. So if training is provided, if the employees and staff is constantly reminded of that they have to take it into consideration, because again, they're quite busy, they may ignore it. So that would be also effective, and ways to enforce it, as much as possible to enforce and that type of work environment and the culture, to gradually they would be conscious of it. I think that would be effective. But again, the educational training could come from many different sources. It could be the younger generation that are more familiar, or they may want to learn more. They may reach out to colleges, universities, or certificates, or so that's one. That one could be supported by the government, providing education as well, with some examples. The technology providers, when they are installing, they could also raise awareness about these issues, how to change the password, how to update, so at different, everybody is responsible. We have to look at it as kind of an organization approach rather than individual, or making one farm or group of farmers or farm workers responsible. So it could happen at different levels, and it could happen, could be supported by different stakeholders.
Amazing. Other members, any comments on that? How you are educating people here?
I think it depends really on the size of your company. So one of the fundamental problems we have with privacy and cybersecurity is, of course, it's a cost center and not a profit center, and nobody ever wants to spend money on it. But we cannot stress enough how important it is that you have to have it. So if you're a very small organization, if you are a small farm and there's 7 people who work there, there are many free videos that the government of Canada has actually worked really hard to create cybersecurity videos, phishing examples, things like that. There are free phishing. And if anyone's not familiar with phishing, it's an email you receive that isn't what it looks like it is. And then you click on a link and then someone's able to access things in your system. So if you're very small and you feel like you really don't have a budget, there are plenty of free resources you could look at. According to Canadian privacy regulations, you're really supposed to train your staff annually on privacy. Unfortunately, we don't have a cybersecurity regulation in the country, which we could use. So if you're a medium-sized business, hopefully you would have some kind of either internal person who's responsible for IT. As Ritesh said, not everyone has somebody in-house. Maybe you have a managed service provider. You should look at that service provider that does that for you and ask them what kind of education they could also provide, because it's something that they should be able to do. And then as a larger company, you should have either a full-time person or someone, you could have a virtual CSO, which is a security officer, an ISO or CISO, which is an information security officer. You could have them in once a week, but there really should be someone who is attuned to your business and how it works that can help you. We keep saying words assets. Someone has to come in and help you identify what those assets are. Like, how do you know what you're trying to protect? There's things you're like, oh, employee records aren't a big deal, but maybe they are. Maybe that is something someone could leverage in a way that you haven't thought of. So it's important that if you're a bigger organization, farm, company, that you have brought someone in who can really get their head around your business, how it operates, and how you need to protect it. And then they will help to provide the education that's required.
Amazing. Thank you. Others, Ritesh, Sikos, do you have any inputs here?
Sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Sikos. I'll go after you.
No, I was going to say some resources are available if you want to leap into the mine. I think there's miner attacks, attack.miner.org. Attack.miner.org is basically like a threat modeling scenario. US government, it's the miner projects, the CVE project, and they'll go through and explain how people will attack you and how they'll hack you, and obviously the way that they'll do it, how they stay in there longer, why they would do it like that, why they would pivot, get to new systems. So like even if they did hack John Deere like we did, and other folks have, maybe I don't show everyone that I've hacked John Deere. Maybe I hack every individual farmer over the course of a certain amount of months, and then it's the other scenario that we were talking about earlier. There's a lot of different things that you can get crafty with if you're a millionaire and making Bitcoin, doing crime. But yeah, go ahead, Ritesh.
All right. I'm just going to build on that for me, and just as kind of my theme has been people. Cybersecurity is not a checkbox exercise. It's not something that you can just do and say it's, we've done it, we've offered this course. It really needs to be baked into the culture. So Kate, I got brought in by a client it was after breach. They said, Ritesh, can you come in and tell us how we can improve what processes, policies, training we need to put into place? And they had policies, training, and processes. All their employees were forced to take cybersecurity training. There was reporting mechanisms. They were doing these weekly, or I think they were doing monthly talks. And I remember interviewing one of the individuals, and I said, so why did you came across this email? Why did you not report it? And they said, I just wasn't sure. And I was like, what do you mean? They said, I didn't want to look dumb, is what they told me. Those were the exact words. And I said, well, why would you look dumb? And they said, well, somebody else reported a suspicious message or activity. It got escalated, and they said, oh, this was a waste of time. And I wasn't even, essentially they felt that they were ostracized for reporting what was false. So when something actually happened, they didn't want to report it because they didn't want to be singled out. So it spoke to the cultural issue. This company has really tried really hard, but middle management in this case really made a previous employee feel not worthwhile, and that in itself had a lasting impression across the organization. I just think about what Toyota did, right? So with their production line, I think it's the very famous, they had a cord or a red cord or something, and you see even something wrong, you pull that cord, and to make sure that people actually pull that cord and weren't scared to stop the production, the assembly line, they made everyone pull the cord at least once at some point and said, don't worry, let's get this back up, just so people were comfortable stopping the production line, getting somebody over to inspect it before continuing their work. And they did that very successfully in the physical world, and they were able to grow. We got to do the same thing in the virtual world. So yes, I agree with everything on the education, just how important it is. But on the flip side, it's so important that you foster that culture. So when people do see something, they report it, and they're not going to say, well, if I report this, am I going to be made fun of? Are people going to say, I just cry wolf? And because that's not what we want, and that is not going to help the conversation organizations fight cybercrime in the 21st century.
Can I build on that one real quick? Did everyone speak? Oh, yeah, I was going to say, in relation to that embarrassing, I totally understand that feeling, and I know as coming from the attacking side of it, theoretically, in good faith, it's constantly feeling like you're doing, like we're trying to seek out the indications that that Ritesh is actually referring to, where people have thought, oh, that'll be enough, or like that's enough security there, or something like that. That's what I'm actively trying to find, the actual small gaps that turn into big holes. And that's what I was able to, for example, do with John Deere. I was able to do certain things there that I mentioned at DEF CON the year before, and also Case IH, and also AgCo, not AgCo actually. There was another one, Class in Germany, and like turning a small little thing like a secondhand database and the thing, but that ends up going into the main database because you can use all the passwords from the other one, and then just it escalates. So these tiny little gaps, like old websites that you've left up, little old domains that you've left up, especially in ag, a lot of legacy stuff. like a lot of stuff that like old domain or old systems where some of the farmers don't want to see the new website updated. So they're dealing with like 2005 looking websites. And there's nothing wrong with that, but yeah, it can get complicated as threats get better at attacking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So we have, I think, spent some time looking at the people side of it. Let's try to look into the process and then vendors and technology side. Let's start with the processes, specifically for instant response, for business continuity. Ritesh, what do you think? What should be done here?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the organization. It depends on the type of breach. But clearly, when it comes to process, the way I look at it is, and I think it was mentioned by one of my fellow panelists, is you don't know what you don't know. What type of inventory, what type of systems, I think it was Kat who mentioned it, do you actually have within your organization? So to me, when we talk about process, and I'm thinking about from the standpoint of you've now been breached. What do you do? What do you do next? So for me, it's first of all, you don't know what to protect if you don't know what's connected, what's vulnerable, what type of records are available. So step one for me out of anything is you do an inventory. Do an inventory of all your systems, all your databases, who has access to it. If you can afford it, third-party audits are fantastic in a sense that they will actually look at who has access to these databases. There's been so many times I've seen employees that have been terminated for willful misconduct who still have access to very sensitive databases, right? Like why? So clearly there's no process in place when you're offboarding an employee. What do you making sure that all their privileges are immediately revoked? Something as simple as that. But that's what kind of an audit would show you. And then it's okay, what do I do next? Right? I think that's the big question. Like, what do I do next? I've now been breached. Where do I go? You got to do these tabletop exercises as an organization. You got to get everyone, as many people as you can on board, do multiple ones throughout the year, and simulate a breach at 3 o'clock in the morning when your IT department, if you're lucky to have one, is let's say has gone home or is on a skeleton, or you have a skeleton staff at that time. What are you going to do? Who are you going to call? You get hit with ransomware, and that screen comes up saying you've been, give me X amount of money, contact this person, some message on the screen. Well, do you keep your computer on or do you turn it off? Right? Who are you going to call? Do you screenshot that stuff? Do you have backup systems? Do you go to paper and pen? Do you just pick up the phone and call somebody? Your email system may be compromised. The emails that you send, maybe taking that piece of malware and further infecting systems. These are all questions that really depend on the type of systems that you have, your current processes. So step one, do your inventory. Step two, do your tabletop exercises. Step three, repeat, I think is probably the best way to do this. And another component of this is when you do that inventory, reach out to the vendors that you have. A lot of these vendors will literally get on the phone with you and tell you to make sure that the security systems and features that have been baked right into the system are being leveraged fully. I can, and I'm sure Kat and Sick and Rosita will probably attest to this. How many times just basic security mechanisms on systems weren't turned on? You're paying for it. You own this stuff. There's processes in place, but you haven't turned them on. So that's what that audit, that inventory will give you. The tabletop exercise will tell you what comes next. Repeating it will build it into the culture. But that to me would be the process, that middle component. After you got your people and the culture there, that's the process element.
That's great. Thank you, Kat.
Yeah, so the big thing with incident response is it is a big thing. Like I'm sure we've all done whole panels on incident response. Once you've identified that it's an incident, whether someone has raised a flag or that it's noticed by a system or a tool, you have to determine what kind of incident it is. And as Ritesh had alluded to, if it's ransomware, you're going to have a different reaction than unauthorized access, which is going to be a different reaction than someone's laptop was stolen out of the back of their car. Each of these has a different procedure. So there are are free plans, literally incidentresponse.com has them, but there are free plans that you can download that will give you the next steps for each of these kind of issues. And then additionally, things that I have noticed that clients are often missing. Number one is a full list of the individuals that you need to contact immediately. And that likely includes, if you do have a managed service provider or IT department, obviously it could be legal or a lawyer. It could be PR, depending on what you have, knowing all the individuals that have to be contacted and having their actual home numbers or non-business numbers, because if your system goes down and you're relying on your internal email system to email everyone in the organization and let them know that there's a breach, you have no way of contacting them. So including that information, as Ritesh said, 3 a.m. If someone is going to strike, they're not going to strike at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. It's going to be 3 a.m. on a Saturday. So having all that information, having a step-by-step plan so you know what you're going to do next, and having a communication timeline. Another thing always missing. How often are you communicating and to whom are you communicating? So if you have said, hey, this is, you can make levels for it. This is a level 1 issue. This is a level 2 issue, this is level 3 issue. If this is a level 1 issue, the following people need to be contacted every hour with updates on what's happening. You will often see in the scramble of trying to solve an incident, 3 people go off into their own corners and not communicate with each other. And then you are losing time and potentially one person solved the problem while the other one's still scrambling to solve the problem. So all the people that you need, next steps, and then a communication cadence plan of how often everyone's going to talk to each other.
Amazing. Thank you.
Can I back? I'll let Rosita. Do you want to go,
Yeah,
Rosita? I was gonna mention. Familiar with the AGCO hack, and I was talking to guys there while they were being ransomware. AGCO being top 4 of the machinery manufacturers of ag equipment, and they had a complex process. The notes that I got out of it was that I think they ran to the FBI too quickly, and then that's like Kat was saying about PR and things like that. It actually can backfire for some companies. You're right, exactly. Talk to PR first, because sometimes if you contact the FBI or DHS or CISA or the equivalent overseas, ASD in Australia, and someone will remind me about the Canadian one. What's the Canadian one called again? It's like the IT. It's not RPMP. Well, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's something like that. That body, similar to the US, like as opposed to the actual cops, and they're non-regulatory bodies, or they can't, they're there to help, and they're not there to make the bounties bigger or things like that, or make you pay more money. But sometimes when it goes into the press and stuff and people's egos get in the way, it actually can, especially with companies that deal with ransomware, some of them they're a bit shady. Like they'll negotiate. They give me 50. This is the thing's 50 million, and we'll give you 100 million. I don't know. It's like, but yeah, it also, another attack vector would be, what would you do in ag, okay, if the upstream was hacked? So say, for example, John Deere was hacked, and I've hacked them already, but say, and I like saying about before, incident response, I don't do incident response actually cause incidents. So just thinking about JD, how would they, say someone had control, exactly like what happened with SolarWinds when they had control, and I know everyone hates hearing about it, but someone had control of the FTP server. So say I had control over John Deere's update server, and it was just slowly pushing out updates to all of the tractors. How does, then you've got to worry about the end user again, like Rosita was mentioning before. Farmers need to know they can just unplug, just take out the SIM card in the bloody tractor, and then you'll be okay. You don't have to worry about, you don't have to be connected. If you can be connected, and there's value add, but there's also risk, and we can't solve the risk, but we can mitigate it. Not mitigate fully, just mitigate it, lessen the risk until it's low enough, undetectable. You know what I mean? Things like that, and that's kind of the whole thing. And I think it was Ritesh was mentioning about it just keeps spending. It's a spending spree.
Well,
and I feel like that. Yeah. Go ahead.
You have a few good points there. Actually, first about engaging likes of RCMP FBI. Well, that's a risk of losing control over the case completely, right? And that
Correct.
would be something that, as you said, I have seen some clients, some organizations are taking as the first step, but that's usually the last, right? It's better that you collect everything and work with the people to take everything in the control. And then if you want to pass it, you would pass it. But that's important part of that instant response element that we're talking about. That should be your processes, right? And the second thing about like the upstream attack, it's not always that easy that you just take off the SIM card and work, because Ritesh was mentioning these days it is not a tractor that has a computer, it's a computer that has a tractor, right? So that needs to be very well considered in the response.
Well, Ali, if I can just mention one small thing, and because I did work in cybercrime related investigations. That's how I started my career. And the only thing I just want to involving law enforcement or reporting it to a government body, it's just you need to seek legal counsel right off the bat. That should be a part. Like you have your IT people, your PR people. You got to have your legal person there. And the reason for that is in Canada, there's Bill C-27 that's coming down. It's in its second reading right now, where it actually makes it mandatory if personal identifiable information has been stolen. And again, as Kat said, it could be a laptop coming out of somebody's car. You got to go through that risk. Kind of do the risk assessment or the threat assessment there, but you may be compelled legally to report this to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and there's similar laws coming down or have already been instituted across the world to deal with privacy breaches. Failure to do so in some of these cases, especially if you're found to really try to circumvent the system, it could be up to 5% of global revenue. That's how much you could be fined. So just involve legal counsel, and they'll give you the best advice, again, because every situation is different. Does it meet the threshold for reporting? Who do you report to? When do you have to report it? What do you need to report? But it's so important. Otherwise, you could get fined. I can't see, again, it depends. Every situation is different, but you can be fined, and these fines are going to be significant administrative monetary penalties levied against the organization.
Yep. So I wanted to add a few points to what we discussed here. First of all, when it comes to agriculture, I want to move a step back, a few step backs, and think about farmers and farms. First of all, I want to again put emphasis on the training aspect, because as Sikot mentioned, if your equipment is hacked, the hacker may live in the environment for months and nobody's aware of it. So it's very important that the employees, the staff are aware of what is a security breach, and they identify it. Because again, they may live in that environment for quite a long time, and they may not know it. So they should report it, the incidents, to the main manager, and then after that to some of the channels that exist for reporting certain incidents. I also want to put emphasis on the inventory aspect that Ritesh mentioned. We have been working with many farmers, and they say, okay, I know what data gets collected, and I'm perfectly fine if they are shared. And I say, do you exactly know what data they collect from you? I said, maybe not, because I have seen the data gets collected with these equipments. It's huge. And I'm not saying they have malicious intention for collecting that. Maybe it was the past version of the software that was collecting more data. And, so a huge amount of data is being collected from the farms, and farmers only know few items that are being collected. And they think, okay, this is not sensitive. So it's absolutely critical inventory, just writing down what you have, what is most sensitive. I have talked to many farmers, they don't even care if their system is breached, because they say, we live on putting our name out there so that they know we exist. So, and then data we have is not sensitive. So, so that's versus maybe livestock, huge farms that they're absolutely sensitive over their data that is financially, maybe from many different, animal welfare, it's quite sensitive. So that's another step that needs to be taken. What is sensitive? What is an attack, and how it should be reported? Another point that Ritesh just mentioned. So farmers that have their own personal data or email, and some of them have customers' data. So until now, PIPEDA, which is the privacy regulation in Canada, wasn't protecting farms' data. With the new regulations, as Ritesh mentioned, some farm data, not a lot, would be protected, very minimal, but customer data will be protected, and they may be liable. They may not care about losing their own data, but they may be liable towards customer data. So they need to, from the beginning, say, okay, this is the customer data that is being collected. This is sensitive. I need to get kind of a consultation. I need to talk to somebody to see how I can protect myself in case there will be a breach. And also they have to report it. I know we don't have a similar regulation similar to US to report. Cybersecurity, agriculture is considered a critical infrastructure in Canada, but there is no reporting requirement for breaches around it. And that's one of the issues that I think we need to address. We need to report incidents, to collect data, to understand where the attacks come from. But for privacy, when there is customer data, when there's sensitive data involved, they have to report it. So that's another, and it has to be within 72 hours. That's another aspect that they need to consider. So that's that. And then when research we have done asking farmers whether they read data agreements. Like us, we don't read privacy policies, they don't read data agreements. That's another issue, because part of it's recommended by many regulations and best practices that they have to mention what are the security kind of features, what the equipment provides in terms of security. So they need to be aware of it. They have to ask lots of questions. Okay, are you going to enable the security features? Because many of them don't, they may have some security features, but it's never enabled because the technician comes in, they set things up and they leave. So how are you going to set things up for me? Give me a contact information. Many of them they don't know who to contact for, how to contact the vendor, who to contact. For privacy, they may need to contact somebody else. For security, they may need to contact somebody else. And so that's another step, who to contact, have a list, and then given the sensitivity of the data, as Coach mentioned, some data is not sensitive to them at all, so then or some connection is not needed to operate, just disconnect, just wait until you get some answers. But in some other cases, you cannot disconnect. So if ventilation doesn't need to be attached to the internet and communicate with everybody, then make it in a way that it doesn't have to be. If another equipment has to be connected, then, so it is important to take all those steps. It may be a little bit complex in the beginning, but after a while, it becomes the culture of the organization and you will repeat it.
I just kind of mention one thing before, Kat. I just want to say, we just have to be, I just want to put this in the minds if there's OEMs listening, I know there is, just the thought of like feature creep when it comes to reliance on networking. So bringing up tractors to a level where they have to be online is just something to think about. Like obviously there's value in it, getting tractors to 24/7. I'm just referring to tractors, but I'm talking about machines, I'm talking about combines, I'm talking about, everything, harvesters, but like having them make, and Ag's unique, and I've mentioned this before in previous talks, Ag is very unique because it's already redundant in that, like farmers it's not like Facebook, came out of nowhere, right? Farms came from bricks and mortar and then went online. It's the opposite and so like they're very used to this is new stuff, right? Being online. The issue is some companies are pushing it to be like you have to be online, and I'm just worried that maybe some companies that don't necessarily need to be that locked in and things like that, they don't have to get them so hard locked into the thing. They've already got a $500,000 tractor, like they've already got a $500,000 tractor from you. It doesn't necessarily, and their loyal and customer loyalty is very important in Ag. And I think just be wary of feature creep. We're adding so many features that they literally have to be online, or they can't start without pinging back over SIM card. I think that's dangerous. You can't use a mobile phone with that reception. It's the same thing. But then again, it's different for Ag, like it's a lot of different things. And I'll let Kat, if you want to bounce off that, if you've got other points.
Oh, well, I did for incident, I had already commented, but I will go on IoT. So IoT is Internet of Things, and that is anything that is connected to the internet. Every single time you connect something into your system, you're creating a doorway or a gateway into your all your systems. I think 6 made that quite clear. Like you can use 100 different entry points to get into a system. Famous story that everyone always talks about was a thermometer that was inside an aquarium that was in a casino. And of course, people were able to hack into the thermometer that was working in an aquarium to access the entire building system, because everything is connected. So we really need to rethink, and I love that what 6 said, and we really need to rethink the why behind a lot of this stuff. Are we adding in systems because they are actually, there's always a risk and a mitigation, and is the value of what we're adding actually higher than the risk that it poses? And we've touched a little bit on some of the privacy regulations, but I will say Quebec is ahead of a lot of the rest of Canada. The Commission d'Accès d'Information, which is their commissioner, is very big on things like biometrics. Like I know, Ali, you had mentioned, let's just use a fingerprint. They're very big on biometrics. They're very big on artificial intelligence. And basically anything you're running in Quebec needs to be justified in that way, where you need to say, look, the benefit of me adding this technology, this artificial intelligence, this biometric outweighs the risk of my data and individuals and everything else that could happen here. So just across farming in general, are you really adding a benefit, or are you adding an additional risk, and weighing that every single time you add that technology?
Absolutely right.
One quick point to Kat, what just Kat said, I completely agree with that. We contacted the Commissioner of Quebec for over farm data protection and AI. So that was the first regulation that was coming down the pipeline, which was going to impact the farm as well. So one thing on AI, also AI is being highly regulated. Many of the AI algorithm, obviously we know, is being deployed with farm data. Some of them have personal data. Some of them are collecting with location of the farmer, or maybe some of them with consumer data. Not only the data is being regulated, the technology is also being regulated as well. And the misuse of information as well is considered under those regulations. So if you're misusing data, some people think, oh, it's a technology issue, cybersecurity. It's not. It's also a human issue. It's also a process issue. It also is the kind of impact issue and misuse of technology issue. So all of those needs to be considered.
Yeah, I was going to mention there are actual benefits though from taking farmers, like farmers do, you think about the box that you tick when you're playing with the program. It says, I want to send my usage data back to the thing, or send anonymous usage data. A lot of people tick that box because they want to help, they want to make the program better. And a lot of farmers do, and they're okay with sending their data back to Deere, Case, AgCo, whatever. So having that data back at them, genuinely, there are reasons to be able to use AI. I think that's what we're getting at. Like, not necessarily abusing it, but there are farmers, and there's a lot of them that they're happy to pay less money for a piece of hardware, become the product themselves, and then benefit in the long run. That is definitely a possibility. It's just that some of the data, then we're going to go back to the manufacturer. Are they taking care of the data? That's the other issue. But like having seen the insides of various ag equipment, software level, and being able to see what specific line items in the database get sent back to Deere, and I keep mentioning Deere, but I've done a lot of work on Deere's products, and we're on amicable terms with it. But the data, significant data, but if you one farmer's data is not really useful, and like flying in over I think I flew into Iowa, and I think I'm looking out the window. I can see people's farms from here. I can see what the crops look like. The crops look like that. Satellites can tell the same stuff. Like it's just the accuracy of the data that's coming out, maybe something of concern. And that's something to think about as well. Just the accuracy of the data.
Right. Yeah. Being very off time, we have like 10 minutes of this panel left. So I encourage attendees that start posting their questions if they have any. And 12 minutes left. Yes. And meanwhile, I would like the panel to talk about like the final notes. What are your suggestions for farmers, especially as we didn't focus that much on the tools and vendors? If you are just paying your suggestions more towards tools and vendors, while I am receiving the question from attendees and try to pass them along, right? So Yeah,
So
go ahead.
can I go with a few quick suggestions? I think I missed this part when we were talking what's missing in Canada. One is breach reporting is missing in Canada. So like US and a few other countries, we need to start reporting these issues. The other one is regulations or best practices for protecting farm data is missing. Many regions, and we have done a very comprehensive study on what best practices and standards exist. Canada has not taken a step on that. So I think that's a recommendation from the government perspective. One recommendations that I missed from process perspective for the farmers or anybody was read the data agreements, ask what data gets collected, with whom they are sharing, be transparent. I mean, that's absolutely the key for farmers to ask who would be accountable. For example, if the farm is hacked and if somebody makes a decision on how much fertilizer to use, who would be accountable? So those are some of the questions. So take the data agreements quite seriously and review them and ask questions. Yeah, so I will let my colleagues to touch on the vendors as you indicated.
Thanks.
I was going to yeah, I was going to say I'm actually against mandatory breach reporting in certain ways. I think that, or instantly reporting it as long as it's private, that's okay. But things that bring more I'm against more regulation. I'm against more rules, more things like that. That's why I prefer seeing what the auto ISAC has done for automotive industry, in that it's actually replaced pretty much the ISO standard 21434. It's 3.4 recurring. And that ISO standard, like, it was brought basically into disrepute last week when the guy, a friend of mine, Sam Curry, he hacked the Nissan thing. He can lock Nissans, he can report them stolen, and you can report every Hyundai stolen in bloody California. And then the cops will actually come up with stolen, so they'll pull you over. Or you hack Nissan, Fiat, a bunch of other ones. And I've hacked a bit of Fiat before, and I've hacked John Deere. Knowing that, some of that stuff is more like having it reported. It's kind of, and I will confess, I've done this with companies in the EU before, because they have GDPR and they have mandatory rules and the fines and things. Like, I've hacked companies in the EU before, and I'll admit it right now, with an FBI agent on the call with me as well. I was talking about Eurotest, but ex-FBI.
I'm not FBI on.
But like, sometimes we've had to get into an agreement where I'll just say, yeah, look, I was working for you at the time, and I breached you by accident, and that sort of thing. Like, to avoid that sort of regulation, and I don't like seeing companies get penalized. Like, if you look at Deere, they're now market leader in cyber because of what I did to them. I was the first person in the bug bounty program, first person to hack their blah blah blah, and it just went on and on. And now they've got 150 reports resolved. They've got a full team. They're hiring right now. They're doing a cyber tractor challenge, whole bunch of stuff. They've got 30 pages on the website about cyber and all these certain things. And I think they're on the call right now. They've been following me around. It's been good. But yeah, it's just, there are positives coming out of things that are happening. I think it's a good thing what's happening in cyber in ag at the moment, especially with the ransomwares that went down. Like, they were quick. There had to be some sort of event like that to sort of prompt the industry. For example, Trimble. I'll let someone else speak. But Trimble, I spoke to Trimble and JCB recently, and Bayer. But Trimble, for example, I spoke to these guys last year on the cyber team. It was just one guy. And then I spoke to him a couple of weeks back, and he's like, man, I've got a whole team now because of what you did, showing all this crap that people can do in ag. Like, he has a whole team now. And it's kind of cool to see the industry picking up, for example, we're talking, and I'm not saying I'm responsible for that, but some of the threat modeling that I've proved to be probable relative to, I think, the Precision Ag Task Force. And I'll get into that later on today at the talk. But yeah, the Precision Ag Task Force, I kind of felt like they're here, and I'm way up here in a different league of damage. But yeah, I'll probably just rambling on at this stage. But if someone wants to jump in, Kat.
Oh, well, I'm going to agree to disagree on the regulatory stuff. What we've seen, especially over the pandemic with healthcare, with education, is all of these companies are like, hey, let's make a tool. And so, as Elise said, we don't have security by design baked into these tools. We don't have privacy by design baked in, and we are just putting people's information at risk because they're using tools that aren't protecting them by default. And so, coming back to what we had said at the very beginning, if you could buy a tool for your farm or your company that you knew had security and privacy baked in, this wouldn't be your problem. And so regulatory guidance on ethical use of AI and putting all that security and privacy into those tools would make your lives easier. And so in that sense, I think regulatory guidance for companies and industry is very important. But as the users of the tools, I mean, Ritesh had said it's not a checkbox. I always say it's a journey, not a destination. You're going to need to get help. And again, help can come in any realm of any budget. You can get someone to come in for an hour. You can get someone to come in full time. You are going to need help with guidance on which tools to get, because the people who sell them will tell you that every tool is your one-stop shop that does everything you need. And that is simply not true. It doesn't exist. So you will need help with guidance. A very, very simple, quick example would be Microsoft 365. Office 365 is more expensive. It tends to go to bigger companies, has a lot of privacy and security features built into it. G Suite, which is much more popular for smaller groups and farms and everything, does not. And so I see a lot of people picking up G Suite because it's easy and it's fast. And then they're sharing, your expenses and all this stuff, putting employee information into a shared Google Drive. That's not a protected document by default. And so you will need help and guidance in order to do that. So just assign yourself, I'm going to need to put this much budget aside, or this is the budget I have aside for cyber, and I'm going to get someone to help me guide on this piece.
I've got a Microsoft security researchers t-shirt on. So one of the top 10 Azure hackers over here, but yeah, I totally agree with that. Azure 365, Office, etc. And I'll let Ritesh go, but yeah, different level to get Gmail and things like that. I like Google, but Microsoft, they have a certain, they've got deals with Lockheed Martin, they've got deals with Deere, they've got deals with Bayer. Like they're actually, they're not built around ads. They're built around actual value add services. And I think that's important to figure out why is someone selling you something? Why is Fortinet selling me? I'm not backing Fortinet or anything, or Palo Alto. What are they selling me? Like, are they selling me a panacea, like a cure, like why can't I just use AVG, free antivirus or something like that? There's a lot of complicated stuff. And you'll actually find, if you look at the CVE registrar, most of the vulnerabilities coming out, not most, that's a flat out lie, but some of these, like IBM, for example, they've got IBM X-Force, but every second day they're getting vulnerabilities themselves. So are you actually preventing yourself from remaining secure, or are you actually opening up bigger holes, e.g. SolarWinds? Go ahead, Ritesh. Yeah.
I'm going to make this quick, just being cognizant of time, and I don't want to repeat what my fellow panelists have said. But those contingency plans, culture, I think is absolutely essential. A lot of these high-tech crimes are really low-tech solutions. I think Rosita mentioned the strong passwords, MFA, backups. Like, I can't emphasize that stuff enough. But now I just want to quickly talk to vendors. The vendors that are on this call are probably going to watch this recording at some point. Share a quick story. I remember when I was in the police service, we were talking about securing police cars and police officers, because there's a lot of tech on police officers. For example, you got body-worn cameras, you might have phones, in the MDT, the mobile device terminal in the car. There's a lot of tech involved. And I remember a vendor coming to us and talking about the biometrics. If an officer wants to do this, they just have to authenticate and they can do all these cool things. So what I did was I sent that vendor on a ride-along with a police officer on the most busiest time. I think it was a Saturday night in downtown Toronto is when we sent the vendor out, and they were going from call to call to call to call, like a stabbing, a domestic, a suicide, a lot of priority calls. And after that, I said, okay, so when are they going to authenticate? Okay, when are they going to use these authentication mechanisms? And they're like, oh, good point. They need the information right away. And how do we know it's this particular officer? Another vendor actually understood that and brought in an ethnographer, how people actually use the technology. And I thought that was I'm talking like in 2012. So that was a real interesting approach that this vendor took, having an ethnographer, how people actually interact with the technology, rethinking security, the personal area network of the officer themselves. So I'm just taking those learnings and bringing it back to ag, to these vendors. Is, we talked about these terms of services and a lot of it being legalese. Well, in Canada, Bill C-27 actually makes it that you can't have this type of legalese, right? There's a plain language requirement. Again, it's in the second reading once it passes. But why put legalese, right? Make it plain language that people can understand, that they can actually read through. It's my job to read through these terms of services. And even I'm like, what on earth does this mean? And I went to law school. So I can't imagine somebody who's trying to run an operation trying to read this stuff. So think about that. You know, personal usage is a precondition to comprehension. So use the technology, understand how people are going to interact with the technology, bake in a culture of cybersecurity, have those contingency plans, and implement, as Kat said, cyber hygiene. And that will start getting us to a point where hopefully we won't be having these conversations in the future.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for
Can I respond to that? Can I respond to that question? There was a question there about, there was a question there about 3G.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that there's a question. Okay, so go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the question was, I have a local farmer friend who invested in a robotic milking system dependent on 3G about 10 years ago. 3G is being shut down. What are the dangers of shoehorning newer comms into older systems that are lacking modern, say, cyber-safe network capabilities? Well, 3G is actually, 4G is actually, there's no real privacy difference between 3G, 4G, and 5G. You've got your SIM card, you're on your own network. You know, you have to hack the whole entire telco to get backwards out to the unit. So, you know, 5G is okay. I don't think there's an example. Actually, Deere rescinded, the WAAS signal, WAAS, Wide Area Something Network. I don't know what it is. Someone will remind me, but the WAAS signal was shut down in the US, or is being shut down, and one of the devices was actually not bricked, but sunsetted. And there's an example, and I'll talk about later in the talk, but of them unbricking it by changing the by putting it back onto WAAS signal. There's like all these. There's another issue that's happening is a lot of tactics that normal manufacturers and normal businesses wouldn't really get away with. Like, imagine telling someone that their mobile phone doesn't work anymore, they have to get a new one. But that's what's happening in ag in some things. So it's something to be wary of. Maybe, you know, some manufacturers might be taking advantage of customers, but that's just the way ag is. You know, not like ag's it's a different industry to any other industry whatsoever. It's different to construction, different to forestry, it's different to mining, it's different to auto. Like, they're completely different. Earthworks, they're all different. They've got different nuances. You know, AI tractor versus AI mining truck versus AI earth moving machine. There's no one around. There's all sorts of different things that you can mention. And is that the only question? There was a Q&A, wasn't there?
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, moving from 3G to 4G and 5G, because that's the changes on the network layer, probably won't impact the end user that much, right, in terms of the security aspect. So we are at time. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the panel, for your contribution, and I'm passing it back to the event moderator. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks so much to Ali for moderating this session. Quite a lively one. And thank you to Kat, Rosita, Ritesh, and Sik for participating. I was really interested in your approach to this session. You know, not only did you talk about threats, but you talked about being prepared, and a few take-home messages for me that are very similar to what I learned in my background in food safety and animal health security or biosecurity. So, you know, there's the importance of people and building a culture, the importance of having the right processes and procedures in place and practicing them. And one of those is a risk register, very important tool to implement. But finally, building technology that's useful to the end user, but also includes the privacy and security elements. So thank you very much for those take-home messages.